Welcome to the Beyond Practice podcast, where we take a deep dive into the latest research and real-world examples to help you elevate your team's performance.
I'm Casey Bishop.
I'm Taylor Grant. Before we get started, a quick shout-out to a friend of the show, Luke Wazzle. Happy December birthday, Luke. Now, on to Episode 3, Empathy, the Heart of Team Resilience. This is the third in our 7-part series on high-performance work systems.
Okay.
Last time we dug into clarity. Today we're exploring how empathy can really unlock your team's full potential, especially in those high-stakes situations.
That's right. We often hear empathy is important, but, what does that actually look like? Particularly in those fields where, one mistake can just have massive consequences.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Yeah.
So today we're going to unpack what empathy actually means, in a high-stakes team. We'll move beyond, the warm and fuzzy stuff and give you some strategies you can use right away.
I like that.
Think of it as a toolkit to build a more resilient team, right? A more connected team, a higher performing team. And hopefully by the end of this, you'll be able to spot those moments where empathy can make all the difference. You'll know how to grow it within your own team.
Sounds good.
You can find more resources and information at beyondpracticepodcast.com. Now let's unpack this. When we say empathy, in this context, what are we actually talking about? It's more than just being nice, right?
Right. Yeah, you're exactly right. It's about really understanding and connecting with your teammates' experiences, their challenges, even their aspirations. It goes deeper than just individual feelings. It's recognizing how each person's role really impacts the whole team, the mission, the big picture. Remember last episode we talked about clarity?
Yeah.
Well, when everyone understands their specific responsibilities, it actually paves the way for empathy because you can see how your work is intertwined with everyone else's.
Oh, that's such a great point. It's weaving a tapestry. Each thread is important, right?
Right.
And contributes to the final piece. But if, one thread is weak or frayed, the whole thing kind of falls apart.
Exactly.
But if you understand how each thread is, connected and supports the others, you're more likely to take care of your own and appreciate the work of others.
That's a great analogy, yeah. And when team members feel valued and understood, they're more likely to open up. They're more willing to share ideas or give feedback, and even talk about concerns, which can be so important in those high-pressure environments where even small mistakes can have big consequences.
Yeah, that makes sense. Especially in fields like surgery or aviation, where a lack of communication could be disastrous. So how do we actually foster this kind of deep empathy in a team? I mean, it's not something that just happens overnight.
You're right. It definitely takes conscious effort and a shift in mindset, both for the individuals on the team and the leaders too. One of the most powerful ways to grow empathy is through collaboration. And I don't just mean working together on projects. I'm talking about collaborative planning sessions, mission briefings, where everyone's involved from the very beginning. It's about ensuring that everybody understands how their individual roles connect to and contribute to the bigger picture.
So instead of just focusing on your own tasks, you're encouraged to see how your piece fits into the whole puzzle. It's like a chef, in a Michelin-star restaurant. They might specialize in sauces, but they need to understand how those sauces make the whole dish better, right?
Exactly, yeah. And that shared understanding, it helps people appreciate each other's contributions. It strengthens the team's overall cohesion.
Right. So another powerful tool is those little pre-meeting discussions.
Yeah.
What you mean small talk? Before the meeting actually starts.
Yeah.
I always thought that was a waste of time.
I know, it seems so trivial. But those informal chats can be surprisingly helpful, It's a chance for team members to connect on a personal level, build rapport, and just get a better understanding of each other's strengths, weaknesses, and what motivates them. When you know your teammates on a personal level, it's just easier to work together and kind of anticipate each other's needs.
So it's not about gossip or anything. It's about building those human connections, right? It's if you know your teammate is going through something tough personally, you're more likely to be an understanding if they're, a little off that day.
Right, exactly.
You're less likely to get frustrated.
Yeah. And it's not just about understanding their struggles. It's about, celebrating their wins, too.
Oh, yeah?
Recognizing their contributions, creating that culture of support and appreciation within the team. Now, another key area for fostering empathy is through personalized development plans.
You mean those plans that help team members develop their skills and advance in their careers?
Yeah.
Isn't that standard practice in most organizations? What makes that special in terms of empathy?
It's not about just checking boxes or fulfilling requirements. It's about collaborating with each person on the team to create a plan that aligns with, like, their aspirations, their potential, and their unique needs. It's showing a genuine interest in their growth, not just, throwing them into whatever training program is available. And it's a two-way street. It requires open communication and active listening from both the leader and the team member.
So it's about having those deeper conversations, understanding their goals, and then like helping them create a path to achieve them. Almost like a coach, right? Helping an athlete reach their full potential.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. And those conversations, that level of individual attention, it sends a powerful message. You matter, we value you, and we're invested in your success.
Right. And when people feel valued, they're more likely to be like engaged, motivated, committed. Speaking of feeling valued, one of the most fundamental pieces of a truly empathetic team is, open communication. But how do you encourage that kind of openness, especially when there's, a power dynamic between the leader and the team members?
It starts with creating a safe space for people to share their ideas, feedback, and concerns without fear of being judged or, facing negative consequences. Things like open door policies are a good start, but it's really about building a culture where people feel comfortable speaking up,
Right.
knowing that they'll be heard and respected, even if they're like raising a tough issue or even challenging the status quo.
Yeah. So no idea is like too small or too out there to be voiced. But then how do you avoid, you know, getting bogged down in the irrelevant details or going off on tangents?
It's a balance, right? It's about
Right.
creating that culture where people feel comfortable sharing, but also having like clear guidelines for communication, having structured meetings with agendas and time frames,
Sure.
but allowing space for brainstorming and creative exploration too. The key is that sense of psychological safety. You want people to feel comfortable speaking up, even if they're unsure or hesitant.
Makes sense. If people are afraid to speak up, problems can like fester and get worse. It's like ignoring a crack in a bridge. Might seem small, but eventually it can lead to, a collapse. So open door policies are good, but what else can we do to like create a framework for effective communication within a team?
Well, one way is to have more structure for the meetings. And I don't mean like, stifling creativity or anything, but providing a clear framework, especially for those like formal meetings, performance reviews. Think of it as setting the stage for a productive conversation.
Okay, so instead of just winging it or springing it on them last minute, you give people a heads up about what to expect, how to prepare.
Exactly. Send an agenda beforehand, let them know what topics are going to be covered. And in those performance reviews, asking why can be so powerful.
Like, why did you make that decision? Or, why are you struggling with this particular task?
Exactly. It shows you're genuinely interested in understanding their perspective, their thought process, right? It shifts the focus from judgment to curiosity, and it can help uncover underlying issues that might be affecting their performance. And different people respond to feedback in different ways.
Yeah, that's a great point. I've always struggled with giving feedback. It's like walking this tightrope between being honest but also supportive. How do you tailor the feedback to individual needs and communication styles?
That's a great question. And actually, it's something we can explore more in depth a little later. But one example, research suggests that neurodivergent individuals often learn best from a like negative, positive, negative approach.
Oh, interesting. I've never heard of that. What is that exactly?
Okay. It's sometimes called the like reverse sandwich method.
Okay.
Instead of starting with praise, you begin with constructive criticism, then highlight the positive, and then end with another area for improvement.
So instead of starting with like a compliment, you start by addressing the areas that need improvement.
That's fascinating. I can see how that might be effective for some people, but I imagine it could also be tricky to deliver without sounding overly critical.
You're right. It definitely requires sensitivity and skill. It's not about being harsh or negative. It's about like presenting the information in a way that works for that individual's learning style and preferences. It shows that, one size doesn't fit all when it comes to communication and feedback.
It's about meeting people where they are, understanding their needs and tailoring your communication style accordingly.
Speaking of different communication styles, what about like emotional intelligence training? I've heard a lot about EQ lately, but I'm still not sure what it is or how it applies to like, team dynamics.
Emotional intelligence, or EQ, is really crucial for building empathy within a team. It's being aware of your own emotions and how they impact others. It's also about being able to understand and respond to the emotions of those around you.
It's not just about being like, touchy-feely. It's
Yeah.
about developing a set of skills that are essential for the team's success.
Exactly. EQ training can help team members and leaders develop those skills they need to communicate more effectively, build strong relationships, and navigate complex situations. They can build self-awareness, empathy, and emotional regulation skills, which were all so important for a positive and supportive team environment.
So it's not just about understanding emotions, it's about managing them well, both individually and as a team. But let's be realistic. Whenever you try to implement new ways of working, especially when it's a shift in mindset like embracing empathy, there's always going to be some resistance. How
Mm.
do you deal with that?
You're right. Resistance to change is really common,
Okay.
and it usually comes from like a lack of understanding or even fear of the unknown.
Sure.
So that's why transparency and consistency are key. Explain the vision and explain the why behind the changes.
Don't just tell people to be more empathetic. Explain how it actually benefits them, the team, the whole organization.
Exactly. It's about connecting those dots between empathy and the team's overall goals and success, right? Don't just talk about it. Involve team members in shaping the changes. Give them like a sense of ownership. Make them feel like they're part of the solution. That collaborative approach can help overcome that resistance.
It's like asking for directions instead of just blindly following your
Yeah,
GPS.
all right.
You'll get there eventually, but the journey is going to be much smoother and more enjoyable if you involve others and get their input.
Right, yeah. And that brings us to the leader's role in all this. Where does leadership fit into this empathy-driven approach?
That's a great question. It makes me think about the difference between a manager who just barks orders and a leader who takes the time to mentor and guide their team.
Yeah, and that's something we'll explore more when we talk about transformational leadership. But the key here is leaders need to walk the walk.
So modeling empathetic behavior is more powerful than any policy or training program.
Absolutely. When leaders genuinely care about their team members and show empathy in their actions, it sets the tone for the whole organization.
It's about creating a culture where empathy is valued and practiced at all levels, right? A
Mhm.
culture where people feel safe, supported, and empowered to just be themselves.
Exactly. And that's what we'll dig into next, exploring the connection between empathy and transformational leadership. So we've been talking about how to, grow empathy within teams, but how does that translate to leadership? How can leaders like embody and encourage empathy to really improve team performance?
That's a great question. I think it's easy to talk about empathy in theory, but seeing it in action, especially from leaders, can be so powerful.
Absolutely.
It's like actions speak louder than words.
Absolutely. And this is where we see the difference between, transactional leadership and transformational leadership.
Okay, so break that down for me. What's the difference? I mean, they both sound kind of similar.
Well, transactional leadership is very focused on like tasks and processes. It's about setting clear goals, giving instructions, and then, rewarding or correcting based on performance. It's a very if this then that kind of
So
approach.
it's like a system of rewards and punishments. You do this well, you get a bonus.
Right.
You mess up, you get reprimanded.
Exactly. And while that can work for, maintaining order and achieving short-term goals, it doesn't necessarily create that like deep trust, loyalty, or intrinsic motivation.
Right.
Transformational leadership, on the other hand, is about inspiring and empowering people to reach their full potential. It's about creating a shared vision and motivating people to go above and beyond, not just for personal gain, but for the good of the whole team.
So it's less about controlling people and more about inspiring them.
Yeah.
Less about the stick and more about the carrot,
Obviously.
but a really, really delicious carrot that everyone wants.
Exactly. And at the heart of transformational leadership, you guessed it, empathy.
Oh, there it is. I knew it had to tie back in somehow. But how does empathy actually play out in a leadership role?
Well, transformational leaders genuinely care about their team's well-being and development, both professionally and personally. They create a supportive environment where people feel valued, respected, heard. They're not just focused on the bottom line, they're invested in the growth and success of everyone on their team.
That sounds a lot like what we were talking about earlier about those personalized development plans.
Yeah, it's all connected. Remember how we talked about those plans being more than just like checking boxes? It's about having those deeper conversations, understanding someone's aspirations, and helping them create a path to get there.
Right.
That's what transformational leadership is all about.
Right.
Investing in people, not just tasks.
Like the difference between a manager who just barks orders and a leader who takes the time to actually mentor and guide their team And you mentioned that transformational leaders champion the growth of all team members, not just like the high performers.
Absolutely. It's about recognizing the potential in everyone and creating opportunities for them to, shine. When leaders genuinely invest in their team's development, it creates this ripple effect.
Mm.
People feel valued, they become more engaged, they strive to improve, and ultimately, they become stronger performers who are more likely to stick around.
So it's a win-win for everybody, right?
Exactly.
The team members grow, the leader benefits from that, and the organization as a whole thrives.
Absolutely.
But let's be honest, not all leaders are like naturally empathetic. Some might even see empathy as a weakness or a distraction from, achieving their goals. How do you convince those leaders that empathy is actually a key to success?
That's a great question, and it can be a challenge, but I think you have to highlight the tangible benefits of empathy. Studies show that companies with empathetic leaders have higher employee engagement,
Okay.
lower turnover, and ultimately better financial performance.
So it's not just a feel-good concept. There's actually data to back it up.
Ah.
It's like the ROI of empathy, right? Invest in your people, and you'll see a return in the form of productivity, innovation, and loyalty.
Exactly. And beyond those measurable outcomes, you're also creating a work environment where people feel valued, respected, and motivated to do their best. And who wouldn't want to work in a place like that?
So we've talked about building empathy within teams and the importance of transformational leadership. But how do we keep that momentum going? How do we ensure continuous growth and development, not just for individuals, but for the team as a whole?
That's where continuing learning and skill development come in, especially in high stakes environments where, knowledge and best practices are constantly evolving. It's so important to create a culture of continuous learning.
So it's not just about the initial training, it's about ongoing learning and development, throughout someone's entire career.
Right,
But in today's world, everyone's so busy.
right.
How do you make time for learning and development without overwhelming people?
That's where micro-learning comes in. Think about, those bite-sized learning modules.
Okay.
Short videos, quick quizzes, even podcasts like this one. It's about delivering information in a way that's easily digestible, that can fit into people's busy schedules.
So instead of like pulling people away from their work for these like hours-long training sessions,
Right.
you give them these little bursts of information that they can like consume on their own time, at their own pace.
Exactly. It makes learning more manageable, less disruptive, and it allows people to focus on those specific skills and knowledge they need to excel.
And another strategy is those skill audits, right?
Yes, exactly.
Skill audits.
So is that like taking inventory of everyone's, skills and knowledge? Sounds kind of like a performance review, but focused on skills rather than like achievements.
Yeah, you're on the right track. By assessing the team's skills, leaders can identify any gaps, and then they can provide the right training to fill those gaps.
This ensures that the learning and development initiatives are targeted and relevant to the team's needs.
So you're not just like throwing random training programs at people, you're being strategic about it.
Exactly. It's about being intentional and efficient with those resources. But fostering a learning culture is just as important.
What does that look like in practice? How do you create a culture where learning is actually valued, encouraged, and not seen as a chore?
Well, it starts with leadership. Leaders need to be active learners themselves,
Okay.
always seeking new knowledge and encouraging their teams to do the same.
Right.
It's about creating opportunities, whether it's attending conferences, online courses, or even just sharing articles and resources.
So it's about making learning part of the team's culture, not just like an afterthought.
Exactly. And it's about celebrating those learning achievements, both big and small. Recognize those who take the initiative to develop new skills, who share what they've learned, or who use their new knowledge to improve things.
So like giving someone a high five for, finishing a challenging online course
Yeah, exactly.
or sharing a really helpful article.
Right. It's about acknowledging that learning is an ongoing process.
Right. It's continuous.
And it's about showing appreciation for the effort people put in. Those small acts of recognition can make a big difference in creating a positive learning environment. And when you invest in your team's development, it shows them that you value them.
Right.
And that leads to increased loyalty and engagement.
It all comes back around, full circle. We've talked about building empathy, the role of leadership, and continuous learning. But how do we actually measure progress and provide feedback? Especially in those high-stakes situations where feedback can feel more like criticism than support.
That's where structured feedback and coaching systems come in. And it's about going beyond those Annual performance reviews?
You mean more frequent check-ins, like quarterly reviews or even like informal feedback throughout the year?
Exactly. More frequent feedback helps make sure everyone's on track with the team's goals. Those annual reviews become less about evaluation and more about reflecting on the progress they've made.
So it's a continuous feedback loop, right? Not something to be afraid of.
Exactly. And don't forget about peer feedback.
So getting feedback from colleagues, not just your manager, isn't that like a recipe for disaster? What if people aren't honest or they just sugarcoat things to avoid conflict?
It can be tricky, but when it's done well, it's so valuable. It promotes mutual accountability and creates a culture of shared learning.
Okay.
It's about creating that safe environment where everyone can give each other constructive feedback, focused on specific behaviors and outcomes, not personal judgments.
So it's not about like gossiping or complaining behind each other's backs.
No.
It's about being honest and helping each other improve.
Exactly. And it requires clear guidelines, set the stage for that constructive feedback, focus on specific things. For example, instead of saying you're not a team player, you might say, hey, I noticed you didn't contribute to the brainstorming session. Is there anything I can do to help you feel more comfortable sharing your ideas?
Right. So it's about framing the feedback in a way that's helpful, not hurtful.
Exactly. And don't forget about real-time recognition.
Celebrating those small wins. Isn't that a little like over the top? Do we really need to give each other trophies for everything?
Not trophies, but acknowledging and appreciating those efforts goes a long way.
Okay.
It could be something as small as a shout out in a meeting or a quick email. It's about recognizing that every contribution matters.
So it's about catching people doing things right.
Yes, creating that culture of appreciation and gratitude where people feel valued. And for a more well-rounded view of performance, 360-degree feedback can be helpful.
So gathering feedback from multiple sources, like your peers, your boss, even people who report to you, that sounds like a lot to process. How do you make sense of all that and actually use it to improve?
Well, it is a lot, but it's about looking for patterns and themes, identifying strengths and areas for growth,
Right.
then using that feedback to create a plan. And 360-degree feedback is just one piece of the puzzle. It should be used along with other types of feedback, like performance reviews, to create a complete picture.
This all sounds great in theory, but what are some potential challenges with, like, implementing these feedback systems, especially in those high-stakes environments where people are already under a lot of pressure? Feedback can be tricky.
You're right. One of the biggest challenges is feedback frequency. If it's only given once a year, it's often too late to course correct.
Yeah.
It can make people feel disconnected from their progress.
Right. It's like waiting until the end of a road trip to check your GPS. You might have been going in the wrong direction for miles.
Exactly. And just as important as frequency is the approach. A one-size-fits-all approach just doesn't work. It's crucial to tailor the feedback style to the individual.
So recognizing that people respond to feedback differently
Right.
and adjusting your approach accordingly,
Yeah.
how do you do that effectively?
It takes self-awareness and a willingness to learn and adapt. There are lots of resources out there, like online courses and workshops that can help leaders develop those different feedback styles.
So invest in your own development as a leader.
Exactly.
Become more effective at giving feedback.
It's like sharpening your tools to make sure you can do the job well.
Before we move on, I want to circle back to emotional intelligence.
Yes.
We talked about it earlier. But why is it so crucial, especially when we're talking about feedback, which can be like a minefield of emotions, both for the person giving it and the person receiving it?
You're right. It can be emotionally charged. High EQ allows you to navigate those complexities with grace and understanding. It helps you give constructive criticism without being hurtful
Sure.
and receive feedback without getting defensive.
So it's about managing those emotions well.
Exactly. And leaders play a crucial role in modeling that behavior.
Okay.
They set the tone for the whole team.
They create that culture, that environment where feedback is a tool for growth.
Exactly. When leaders are self-aware, empathetic, and good at managing their own emotions, it creates this ripple effect.
Right.
It builds psychological safety where people feel comfortable giving and receiving feedback openly and honestly.
So creating a culture where feedback is a gift, not something to be afraid of.
Exactly. Now, speaking of real-world examples, remember those case studies we promised? The ones that illustrate empathy in action.
Yeah.
Ready to dive into those?
Let's do it.
Okay, great. Let's start with an example from the oil and gas industry, Shell's Hearts and Minds program.
Right.
This program started in the early 2000s to address safety and enhance psychological safety at the team level.
The oil and gas industry is inherently risky, right?
Yeah.
One mistake can have huge consequences. So how did empathy actually improve safety? It seems like it might make people more hesitant to take risks or make tough calls,
That's a common misconception. Shell recognized that just having regulations and technical systems wasn't enough.
right?
They knew that team dynamics, empathy from leaders, and open communication were just as important.
So they took a more holistic approach, focused on the people, not just the rules.
Exactly. They implemented things like active listening and fostered psychological safety,
Okay.
encouraging those open and honest conversations about challenges and stressors.
So creating a space where people felt comfortable speaking up, even if it was something small, without being punished.
Exactly. And it wasn't just about listening, it was about taking action.
Yeah.
For example, during operations, workers could raise concerns about unsafe practices, knowing they'd be supported, not reprimanded.
That trust is so crucial, especially when the stakes are so high.
Absolutely. Another key aspect was personalized development plans. Remember how we talked about those showing a genuine interest in people's growth?
Yeah.
Well, leaders acted as advocates for their teams,
Okay.
addressing safety concerns and providing resources and training.
So they were really supporting those team members, helping them develop the skills to work safely.
Exactly. And they had this Safety Champions initiative where team members led peer-to-peer support and feedback.
That's a great way to empower everyone and make safety a shared responsibility.
Absolutely. Shell also emphasized humanizing communication.
What does that mean? Is it just about being friendly and approachable?
It's more than that. It's about connecting on an emotional level,
Okay.
using stories and examples to make safety a shared value. It's that message of, we care about you, not just the results.
That's powerful. It makes people prioritize safety, not just for themselves, but for their teammates too.
Exactly. And it worked. The program led to a big reduction in accidents.
Wow, so empathy literally saved lives.
It played a big part, for sure. By making empathy part of their culture, Shell created a safety-first environment that transformed their performance.
That's a great example of how empathy can make a real difference, especially when the stakes are high. For our next case study, let's shift gears to something completely different. The Chilean miners' rescue in 2010.
Oh, yeah.
This story is all about resilience and collaboration, but how did empathy fit in?
It was crucial, both in the rescue and in how the world responded. Remember, 33 miners were trapped underground for 69 days,
Right.
facing unimaginable conditions. But empathy was everywhere, from the rescuers to the Chilean leadership to the people around the world who are offering support.
So it wasn't just about the technical stuff, it was about the human connection, the compassion.
Exactly. The rescuers, for example, did everything they could to take care of the miners' well-being.
Okay.
They knew that beyond the food and water, they were dealing with immense stress and trauma.
So it's about treating them with dignity and respect, not just keeping them alive.
Precisely. They sent down communication devices, letters from loved ones, even videos to keep
Wow.
their spirits up. They recognized that hope and connection were as important as basic necessities.
That connection must have meant so much to those guys, knowing they weren't forgotten.
It did. And the rescue operation itself was a masterclass in collaboration and psychological safety.
Okay.
Teams from all over the world worked together, sharing ideas and adapting strategies.
So it was all about the shared goal and that empathy for the trapped miners.
Exactly. And the Chilean government showed amazing empathy, too. They got experts from all over to help,
Right.
and they supported the miners' families.
So it was a truly global effort driven by empathy.
It was, and it worked. All 33 miners were rescued.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
It just shows what's possible when empathy guides our actions, even
Yeah.
in the most difficult situations.
It really does. Now, for our last case study, let's look at the U.S. Navy's response to the USS Fitzgerald collision in 2017.
Okay.
This was a tragic incident, but it highlights how important empathy is for recovery and rebuilding trust.
For those who don't know, can you give us some background on what happened?
Sure. In June 2017, the USS Fitzgerald collided with a container ship off the coast of Japan. 7 sailors died.
Oh, wow.
The investigation found leadership failures,
Right.
but it also showed how important empathy was in supporting the survivors and rebuilding trust.
So amidst all the investigations and accountability, there was also a focus on the human impact, on the well-being of those who survived and the families of those who were lost.
Absolutely. The Navy's leaders immediately prioritized the well-being of the surviving crew.
Okay.
They brought in counselors, chaplains, and support teams to help them deal with the trauma.
So recognizing that even in the military, people need emotional support.
Exactly. They also had team debriefings to create a safe space to share their experiences.
So acknowledging the trauma, And providing support.
Exactly. And the commanding officers had an open-door policy, encouraging sailors to speak up about safety concerns, anything that could prevent future tragedies.
So even in the Navy, where you usually just follow orders, they created that space for open dialogue.
They did. They knew that everyone had valuable insights to offer,
Right.
and they understood that to rebuild trust, they needed to acknowledge those past mistakes and encourage communication and improvement.
That's a powerful message. It shows that empathy can lead to positive change, even in the toughest situations.
It can. And the Navy's response wasn't just about dealing with the immediate aftermath.
Right.
It was about making long-term changes. Leadership reforms focused on emotional intelligence, accountability, and feedback, which ultimately led to a stronger and more resilient Navy.
So they learned from that tragedy
Mm.
and created a more empathetic environment, one that's better prepared for future challenges.
Exactly. And that's a takeaway for all of us. Empathy is not optional.
Right.
It's essential for building strong teams, navigating challenges, and creating organizations that are both successful and humane.
These case studies have been incredible. They really highlight the power of empathy in so many different situations. Is there anything else you want to add before we wrap up, Casey?
Just this, empathy isn't a magic solution,
Sure.
but it's a powerful tool to help us create better organizations. It's about recognizing that people are at the heart of everything we do. And by nurturing empathy, we can unlock extraordinary potential.
Well said. Those are words to live by. Empathy is a must-have for any leader or team that wants to succeed in today's world. Those examples are incredible. They really show that empathy, it's a game changer. From preventing accidents like with Shell to, you know, rescuing those miners to rebuilding trust after a tragedy like with the USS Fitzgerald.
Yeah.
It's not just a feel-good idea. It really makes a difference.
It does. And you know what I find so interesting? Empathy, it's not just about warm and fuzzy feelings. It's about understanding how connected we all are.
It's like realizing that our actions, they have these ripple effects, right? They
Yeah.
impact other people even when we don't see it. Kind of
Exactly.
like that butterfly effect, right?
Exactly. A small action can have huge consequences somewhere else. And that brings us back to leadership. Do you remember that Simon Sinek quote?
Oh, yeah, remind me.
Leadership is not about being in charge. It's about taking care of those in your charge. Leaders aren't responsible for the result. They're responsible for the people who are responsible for the results.
That's a good one. That
Yeah.
really sums up, empathetic leadership. It's not about being the boss and demanding things. It's about helping others do their best
Right.
and creating an environment where everyone feels supported.
It's about shifting that mindset from what can people do for me to how can I help them succeed? When leaders do that, it changes everything.
It's like a ripple effect, right?
Yeah.
People feel safe to be themselves, to try new things, to innovate.
And ultimately to achieve great things together.
Exactly. So, as you're listening to this, think about how you can bring more empathy to your own team.
Yeah, good point.
It doesn't have to be some big thing. Maybe it's just taking a few minutes before a meeting to, connect with your colleagues on a personal level.
Right. Or maybe you advocate for those personalized development plans, the
Yeah.
ones that support your team's growth.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Or even suggest like an emotional intelligence training for your team.
Great idea. Whatever you do, remember, empathy is not a weakness.
It's definitely not.
It's a strength. It's a superpower, really. It can help us create a more compassionate and resilient future for everyone.
Well said, Casey. And that brings us to the end of this episode of the Beyond Practice podcast. We hope you found this deep dive into empathy insightful.
And inspiring.
Yeah, inspiring. If you want to keep learning, check out our website, beyondpracticepodcast.com. We have tons of resources there.
And be sure to join us next time.
Yes, we'll continue our exploration of high-performance work systems.
Until then, stay curious, stay engaged.
And keep practicing.
Thanks for listening.
We'll see you next time.